If I say the words Emancipation Proclamation, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? My guess is that you would be thinking of Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves during the Civil War. But what if I told you that that was a copycat move and that two Emancipation Proclamations were issued during the Revolutionary War? You might say, wow, which is what this channel is all about. My name is Ron Guth, and each week I present a historical topic that hopefully will surprise you and make you say, wow, I never knew that before. But first, this channel is sponsored by no one. The fact is, I can't monetize this channel, which will never cost you anything, until I get to 1,000 subscribers. Right now, I'm at 76, so you can imagine I've got a long way to go. So please, you would help me out a lot if you haven't subscribed yet and you like these videos, even a tiny bit, please hit the subscribe button. If you viewed any of my previous videos, and I encourage you to do so, you'll notice that I'm a big fan of Black history. I've talked about Crispus Attucks, slave tags, Dred Scott, Uncle Tom, slave narratives, and so on. This week, I'd like to introduce you to two proclamations that were issued during the Revolutionary War by the British, where they were encouraging slaves and indentured servants to cross over to the British side in return for certain promises and freedoms. It has been said that all is fair in love and war. In war, we think of inflicting maximum damage by fighting and killing the enemy. However, there's another way to destroy or damage the enemy, and that is to ruin their ability to make a living. It's kind of like the so-called cancel culture of today. So the best way to hurt a slave owner was to take his slaves away. By doing so, the British hurt the American slave owners in at least three different ways. Number one, by taking away the labor that was available to them and their means of production, thereby killing his ability to make a living. Number two, by taking away his valuable property, which is what slaves were, and destroying his wealth. And three, arming his slaves against him, creating a potential loss of his life and forcing the transfer of resources from production to protection. The first British Emancipation Proclamation was the so-called Dunmore Proclamation, issued on November 7th, 1775. Dunmore, his real name was John Murray, the fourth Earl of Dunmore, and he was the governor of Virginia from 1771 to 1775. You got to remember, up to and during the Revolutionary War, and even through the Revolutionary War, the Americans were British subjects until they gained their independence. So it's not unusual for the governor of Virginia to be British, which is what he was. Now here's a copy of Dunmore's proclamation, which would have been printed and tacked to trees and distributed throughout most of Virginia. The most significant lines are the following, and I quote, "And I do hereby further declare all indented servants, Negroes, or others appertaining to rebels, free, that are able and willing to bear arms, they joining his Majesty's troops as soon as may be, ... end quote. An estimated 800 to 2,000 slaves joined Dunmore in what became known as the Ethiopian Regiment. Now the Virginians, the American rebels on the American side, responded by proclaiming that any fugitive slaves, any slaves that ran away, would be executed. So the blacks had to make a decision. Do I stay with the slave owners or do I go to the British? The second British Emancipation Proclamation was issued by General Henry Clinton on June 30th, 1779. This is known as the Phillipsburg Proclamation, referring to Clinton's headquarters at the Phillipsburg Manor House in Westchester County, New York, which still exists today as a museum. Quote, whereas the enemy have adopted a practice of enrolling Negroes among their troops, I do hereby give notice that all Negroes taken in arms or upon any military duty shall be purchased for the public service at a stated price and the money to be paid to the captors. End quote. This meant that any blacks that were captured while fighting on the American side would have been sold into slavery on the British side, and their captors would receive the money from their sale. Clinton went on, quote, but I do most strictly forbid any person to sell or claim right over any Negro, the property of a rebel, who may take refuge within any part of this army. And I do promise to every Negro who shall desert the rebel standard full security to follow within these lines any occupation which he shall think proper. End quote. Though this might appear to be a general emancipation, it's really more of an opportunity for blacks to come over to the British lines and pursue a job of their choice under their protection. The decision by blacks to move over to the British side obviously was not difficult. On the American side, there was continued enslavement. On the British side, there was hope. After all, the British were expected to win the war, in which case the protection of the blacks would have become permanent. Now, as we all know, the British lost the war, so what happened to all the blacks that joined their side? Well, that's a different story that I'll save for next week when I discuss what is known as the Book of Negroes, which is really a document that lists almost 3,000 blacks who left with the British and went to various parts of the world, including Nova Scotia, Canada. It's a very interesting story, and I hope you'll join me next week to see that. So thank you for viewing, and I'll see you on the next episode of the WOW History Channel. This is Ron Guth, signing off.